What would you do if a single bet turned your entire life upside down? For Lucas, a wealthy but arrogant millionaire, it was supposed to be a joke, a reckless gamble with his friends. But when he married Maya, a humble street vendor struggling to support her sick mother, he never imagined the chain of events it would unleash. A betrayal, a shocking revelation, and a life-changing transformation. This story will prove that sometimes love finds you in the most unexpected places. But here's the real question. Can a man who started with arrogance ever truly change? Before we start the story, comment below which city you are watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. Lucas Alton's life was the epitome of success, or at least that's how it appeared from the outside. By the age of 30, he had already amassed a fortune that most could only dream of. As the CEO of a thriving tech company, he owned properties in the world's most luxurious cities, drove cars that turned heads, and had a network of influential friends who moved through life as though it were their playground. But beneath the polished veneer, Lucas felt nothing. His days were a blur of board meetings, power lunches, and exclusive parties, yet they left him hollow. He was a man surrounded by admiration but starved of genuine connection. For Lucas, everything, people, relationships, even emotions, had a price tag. He didn't believe in love or loyalty. After all, his upbringing had taught him that nothing in life came for free. Lucas's father, Richard Alton, had been a titan of industry, a man whose name alone commanded respect. But he had been as cold and unyielding as the steel skyscrapers he built. From an early age, Lucas was groomed to take over the family empire, his days filled with lessons on strategy, power, and dominance. There was no room for affection or vulnerability in the Alton household. Richard's favorite saying echoed in Lucas's mind even now. Lucas had taken those lessons to heart. By his mid-20s, he had already made a name for himself in the tech world, outpacing his competitors with ruthless efficiency. But along the way, he had lost any semblance of balance in his life. Relationships were transactional. His charm and wealth ensured that doors opened for him, but they also kept people at a distance. No one got close enough to see the cracks beneath the surface. It wasn't that Lucas was unaware of his emptiness. He knew he was lonely, but he saw no point in addressing it. Emotional fulfillment seemed like a fairy tale for the naive. Lucas preferred the simplicity of transactions. If you played your cards right, you got what you wanted. There was no need for complications like love or vulnerability. His inner circle of friends shared this mindset. Max, his closest companion, was the epitome of idle wealth, a man who had inherited a fortune but lacked the ambition to do much with it. He spent his days gambling, traveling, and chasing superficial thrills. Then there was Ethan, the sharp-tongued cynic whose biting humor made him the life of every party. Together, the trio moved through life with a sense of invincibility, their privilege insulating them from the consequences of their actions. One evening, as the three lounged on the rooftop terrace of an exclusive bar, Max leaned back in his chair, a sly grin on his face. "Lucas, you're getting boring," he said, swirling his whiskey. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Boring? Since when?" "Since forever," Ethan chimed in, lighting a cigar. "You're predictable, man. You win at everything, but where's the fun in that? You're like a racehorse that's never had to jump a hurdle." Lucas smirked, but the comment stung more than he cared to admit. "And what would you have me do? Throw a race just to amuse you?" "No," Max interjected, leaning forward, his grin widening. "I'm saying you need to do something outrageous, something nobody else would dare." Lucas's interest was piqued, though he didn't let it show. "Such as?" Max's eyes gleamed with mischief. "Marry someone completely out of your league, not in the usual way, no models, no heiresses. I'm talking about someone from the bottom rung of society. A street vendor, maybe. Prove that even the most unpolished person can be turned into the perfect partner with enough effort." Ethan burst out laughing, the sound echoing across the terrace. "Now that's a challenge. Can you imagine? Lucas Alton, the savior of the common folk." Lucas leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. And what exactly would I gain from this little experiment? The satisfaction of proving us wrong, Max said with a shrug. And, of course, the bragging rights. Lucas stared at his friends, their laughter ringing in his ears. Normally, he would have dismissed such a ridiculous idea, but something about it intrigued him. It wasn't about proving them wrong or winning the bet, it was about shaking up his monotonous life. The thought of doing something so outlandish appealed to the part of him that craved unpredictability. "All right," he said finally, a sly grin spreading across his face. "I'll do it. But don't cry when I pull it off effortlessly." The table erupted in cheers, their amusement palpable. For Lucas, it was just another game. He had no idea it would become the most important gamble of his life. Maya Singh's life was a tapestry of hardship woven with threads of quiet resilience. Every morning, before the city fully awoke, she would step into the bustling streets with a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, her small folding table under her arm. By the time the first rays of sunlight pierced the smog, she'd have her stall set up on the corner of a busy intersection, the handmade trinkets she crafted with care neatly arranged for display. Her jewelry wasn't just a means of survival, it was an extension of her creativity, her way of bringing a little beauty into an otherwise unforgiving world. Each bracelet, necklace and earring told a story, of late nights spent molding and shaping beads, of tiny victories when a customer smiled as they walked away with a piece they loved. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Maya's days were long, her profits meager, but her purpose was unshakable, to care for her ailing mother. Her mother, once a vibrant and strong woman, had been bedridden for years, her health steadily declining, with no reprieve in sight. Medical bills mounted faster than Maya could pay them, and though she worked tirelessly, the weight of it all pressed down on her like an unrelenting storm. Yet despite her struggles, Maya was known in her community for her unyielding kindness. She had a way of making everyone feel seen, whether it was through a warm smile or a small act of generosity. On days when business was good, she would set aside a few rupees to buy sweets for the children who played in the nearby alley. On days when it wasn't, she would share her meager lunch with the elderly vendor who sold flowers 2 stalls down. "Maya, you work too hard," her neighbor, Mrs. Kapoor, often said, watching her set up her stall in the pre-dawn light. "You should rest sometimes, child. You're only human." Maya would smile, her tired eyes crinkling at the corners. "Rest doesn't pay the bills, Auntie," she'd reply, her voice gentle but firm. Deep down, she knew the truth. If she stopped, even for a moment, the fragile balance she had managed to maintain would collapse. When she wasn't working, Maya spent her time tending to her mother. Their apartment was small and cramped, with peeling paint and a leaky faucet that never seemed to stop dripping. But Maya had done her best to make it a home. The walls were adorned with her mother's old photographs, memories of a time when life had been kinder to them. A worn but sturdy chair sat by the window, where her mother liked to sit on good days, watching the world go by. "Maya," her mother said one evening, her voice weak but loving, "you're always running around for me. When will you take time for yourself?" Maya knelt by her mother's bedside, adjusting the fraying blanket that covered her. "I'm fine, Ma. You're all that matters." Her mother sighed, her frail hand reaching out to cup Maya's cheek. "You deserve more than this, Beta, more than this struggle." Maya swallowed the lump in her throat, her smile unwavering. "Don't worry about me, just focus on getting better." Despite her optimism, there were moments when the weight of it all became too much. Late at night, after her mother had fallen asleep and the world outside had gone quiet, Maya would sit by the window, staring out at the city light. She would think about the life she had imagined for herself as a child, and where she could create her jewelry, not out of necessity, but out of love. But those thoughts never lingered for long. Maya was practical to a fault, and she knew better than to dwell on what could have been. She couldn't afford to dream when reality demanded her attention. One particular morning, as Maya arranged her wares, a little girl approached her. The child's wide eyes sparkled as she examined the colorful bracelets laid out before her. The girl exclaimed, her small hands hovering over the display. Maya smiled. "Do you see one you like?" The girl hesitated, then pointed to a bracelet made of blue and silver beads. That one. Maya picked it up and held it out to her. The girl's face lit up, but she quickly shook her head. I don't have any money. Maya knelt to the girl's level, her voice soft. That's all right. Consider it a gift. The girl's smile grew, and she clutched the bracelet to her chest. Thank you, she said before running off, her laughter trailing behind. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type treasure if you've made it this far. Only those who get this far will understand. Now, let's get back to the story. Maya watched her go, a small sense of satisfaction warming her heart. Moments like these reminded her why she kept going. Even in the midst of her own struggles, she found joy in making others happy. The idea had started as nothing more than a joke, a passing comment made in jest over drinks one breezy evening. Lucas's friends had teased him relentlessly, mocking his predictable victories, his unchallenged success, and his relentless need to dominate every aspect of his life. But what began as playful banter soon morphed into a challenge, a dare designed to test Lucas's self-proclaimed confidence and control. Max, sprawled across a plush chair on the rooftop terrace of their favorite bar, swirled the whiskey in his glass lazily. So, Lucas, he drawled, his voice tinged with amusement, when's the last time you did something truly outrageous? And no, I'm not talking about buying another yacht or hosting one of your infamous parties. Lucas smirked, leaning back in his chair. Outrageous? Something that actually gets people talking, Max replied, his grin widening. Something so wild it shakes up your boring, perfect life. Boring, Lucas repeated, arching an eyebrow. I think you've confused boring with successful. Oh, please, Ethan chimed in, lighting a cigar. The sharp tang of the smoke swirled between them. You're like a racehorse that's never had to jump a single hurdle. Sure, you're fast, but where's the fun in that? Lucas let out a short laugh. And what do you suggest? That I throw caution to the wind just to entertain you? Precisely, Max said, sitting up straighter, his expression alight with mischief. You've mastered the art of winning in business, social circles, and your so-called love life, or whatever passes for it these days. But could you win at something completely out of your comfort zone? Lucas's smirk widened, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Go on. All right, Max began, his voice dropping conspiratorially. Pick someone random, someone completely out of your league, not in the usual way. I'm talking about a total nobody. A street vendor, maybe. Marry her, transform her, and prove that even the most unpolished person can be turned into the perfect partner. Ethan nearly choked on his drink, laughing so hard that it echoed across the terrace. Lucas Alton, the Pygmalion of the modern age? Lucas rolled his eyes, but he couldn't deny the spark of intrigue growing within him. The idea was absurd, ridiculous even, but that's precisely what made it appeal. It wasn't about proving anything to Max or Ethan. It was about breaking free from the monotony of his carefully curated life. And what do I get if I succeed? Lucas asked, his tone calm but laced with amusement. Max shrugged, leaning back in his chair with a smug expression. The satisfaction of proving us wrong. Oh, and of course the most extravagant celebration this city's ever seen. Honor. Ethan raised his glass in mock reverence. Lucas chuckled, clinking his glass with theirs. All right, he said, his confidence radiating. Challenge accepted. The next morning, as Lucas settled into the back seat of his sleek black car, the echoes of the previous night's conversation lingered in his mind. He found himself scanning the bustling streets with an intensity that surprised even him. Vendors lined the sidewalks, hawking their wares to the endless stream of pedestrians. The air buzzed with the sounds of honking horns, bartering voices, and the occasional laugh of a child darting through the crowd. Lucas had always viewed the streets as chaotic, a backdrop to his world of private jets and high-rise offices. But today, he was seeing them differently. He wasn't looking at the chaos, he was searching for someone within it. His driver, Peter, glanced at him in the rearview mirror, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. Something specific you're looking for, sir? Lucas tapped his fingers against the leather seat thoughtfully. Not something, someone. Peter raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. He had been in Lucas's employ long enough to know that questions weren't always welcome. Still, he couldn't help but wonder what had prompted Lucas's sudden interest in the bustling streets he usually ignored. They turned onto a narrow road lined with vendors selling everything from fresh produce to handmade trinkets. The smell of spices wafted through the air, mingling with the sharp tang of freshly cut fruit. Lucas's gaze flitted from stall to stall until it landed on a young woman setting up a modest display of jewelry. She moved with quiet efficiency, her hands arranging each piece with care. There was a grace to her movements, a calmness that seemed to set her apart from the frenetic energy of the street. Her simple dress and loose braid spoke of a life far removed from Lucas's world, yet there was something about her, an air of quiet determination that caught his attention. "That one," Lucas said, nodding toward her. Peter slowed the car, pulling over to the curb. "The one with the jewelry?" "Exactly," Lucas replied, stepping out of the car before Peter could open the door. The din of the street enveloped him as he made his way toward the stall, his polished shoes clicking against the uneven pavement. Maya was too focused on arranging her display to notice Lucas' approach. Her fingers worked quickly, placing each piece of jewelry in its proper place, her movements precise but unhurried. The morning sun glinted off the colorful beads, casting tiny rainbows on the weathered fabric of her tablecloth. Lucas cleared his throat, and Maya looked up, startled. She hadn't expected to see a man like him here. A stranger in an immaculate suit, his presence a stark contrast to the lively but chaotic street around. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously, her voice tinged with polite curiosity. Lucas's eyes scanned her stall briefly before settling on her. "You're Maya, right?" he said, his tone calm and confident. She frowned slightly. "I make it my business to know things," he replied smoothly, though the statement sounded more like a practiced line than a real answer. "I have a proposition for you." Maya stiffened. She had encountered men like him before, men who thought they could buy whatever they wanted, no matter how personal or sacred. Her instinct was to refuse outright, but something about his demeanor gave her pause. "What kind of proposition?" she asked warily. Lucas leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice as if to make the conversation feel more intimate. "It's unconventional, but it could change your life." Maya crossed her arms, her defenses rising. "I don't think I'm interested." "You haven't even heard what I'm offering," Lucas said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Hear me out, and then decide." Against her better judgment, Maya nodded. "Fine, I'm listening." Lucas took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I want you to marry me." Maya stared at him, her disbelief evident. "Excuse me." "It's not about love or commitment," he continued, unfazed by her reaction. "Think of it as a business arrangement. You agree to be my wife for 1 year, and in return, I'll pay for all of your mother's medical expenses. Whatever treatment she needs, no matter the cost, it'll be covered. On top of that, I'll provide you with enough money to ensure you never have to struggle again." For a moment, the bustling street seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. Maya's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. She searched his face for some hint of a joke. "This is ridiculous," she said finally, shaking her head. "You don't even know me. Why would you do something like that?" Lucas hesitated for the briefest moment before responding. "Because I can." Maya's brow furrowed, her suspicion growing. "There has to be a catch." "There's no catch," Lucas assured her. "I need a wife for reasons that don't concern you. You need financial stability and support for your mother. This arrangement benefits us both." Maya looked away, her thoughts swirling. Her mother's frail face flashed in her mind. The weight of medical bills that kept her awake at night, the quiet desperation that had become her constant companion. Could she really walk away from the opportunity to give her mother the care she needed? "And if I say no?" she asked quietly. Lucas shrugged, his confidence unshaken. "Then I'll find someone else. But I chose you because I believe you're strong enough to handle this." His words caught her off guard. She had spent so much of her life feeling invisible, overlooked by the world around her. To hear someone recognize her strength, even in such a strange context, was unexpected. Maya closed her eyes briefly, trying to steady herself. This wasn't just about her, it was about her mother, who depended on her for everything. If she said no, she'd be turning her back on the one chance she might have to save her. "All right," she said finally, her voice trembling but firm. "I'll do it. For my mother." Lucas's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. "Good. You won't regret." The wedding was as cold and transactional as the proposal had been, held in a sterile courthouse with no guests, no decorations, and no fanfare. It was a far cry from the ceremonies Maya had dreamed of as a child. She wore a borrowed dress, its faded seams a stark contrast to Lucas's tailored suit. Her hands trembled as she clutched a bouquet of wilted flowers, hastily assembled from the leftovers of her stew. The officiant's voice echoed through the empty room. "Do you, Lucas Alton, take Maya Singh to be your lawful wife?" "I do," Lucas replied without hesitation, his tone steady and matter-of-fact. The officiant turned to Maya. "And do you, Maya Singh, take Lucas Alton to be your lawful husband?" Maya hesitated, her mind racing. This was it, the moment she would bind herself to a man she barely knew, a life she couldn't imagine. But then she thought of her mother, lying in that small apartment, waiting for help that only Lucas could provide. "I do," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The officiant stamped the papers with finality. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." There was no kiss to seal the union, no celebration to mark the occasion. Lucas extended a hand to Maya, his expression unreadable. "Shall we?" he asked, his voice polite but detached. Maya placed her hand in his, her heart heavy as he led her out of the courthouse. The sleek black car was waiting at the curb, its engine idling softly. Lucas opened the door for her, a gesture that felt more obligatory than genuine. As the car pulled away, Maya stared out the window, the city blurring past her. She felt like a passenger in her own life, swept up in a current she couldn't control. Beside her, Lucas was already on his phone, immersed in emails and messages, as though nothing significant had happened. For him, this was just another deal. For her, it was the beginning of a life she couldn't yet comprehend. The car pulled up to Lucas's estate just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sprawling mansion in hues of gold and amber. Maya pressed her face closer to the window, her breath catching as she took in the sheer grandeur of the property. The sleek modern design of the house, with its towering glass walls and manicured gardens, seemed more like an architectural marvel than a home. "Welcome to your new life," Lucas said, his voice clipped and emotionless, as the driver opened Maya's door. He stepped out first, adjusting his tailored jacket with the ease of someone accustomed to such elegance. Maya hesitated before following, her worn shoes making soft clicks against the pristine stone driveway. She clutched her small bag tightly, feeling painfully out of place amidst the towering fountains and perfectly trimmed hedges. Lucas didn't wait for her, striding confidently toward the massive front doors, his posture exuding authority. "Keep up," he said over his shoulder, not bothering to look back. Maya quickened her pace, her heart pounding. The enormity of what she had agreed to was hitting her all at once, and she felt like a single thread unraveling in a world woven from wealth and power. She followed Lucas inside, and the air seemed to change, cooler and more still than she expected. The foyer was vast, its marble floors polished to a mirror-like shine. A grand chandelier hung above, scattering prisms of light across the walls, which were adorned with paintings so exquisite that Maya guessed they belonged in museums. Everything about the house screamed opulence, yet there was a hollowness to it, a lack of life that made it feel more like a showroom than a home. "This will be your room," Lucas said abruptly, stopping at the end of a long corridor. He opened the door with a casual flick of his wrist. Soft creams and golds adorned every surface, from the plush canopy bed to the curtains that framed the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city skyline stretched out beyond the glass, twinkling like 1,000 scattered jewels. Maya stepped inside tentatively, her footsteps muffled by the thick rug. She ran her fingers along the edge of the bed, the silk comforter cool to the touch. It was beautiful, but it felt cold, too perfect, too pristine to belong to anyone. "Dinner is at 8, Lucas said from the doorway. "You'll meet the rest of my family then." Before Maya could respond, he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall. She stood there for a moment, taking in the room that was now hers. It was larger than the apartment she shared with her mother, yet it felt far less welcoming. Taking a deep breath, she unpacked her belongings. A few neatly folded dresses, some hand-me-downs from neighbors, and her jewelry-making tools. They looked almost laughably out of place in the vast empty wardrobe, their presence a stark reminder of the world she came from. Dinner was a grand affair, held in a dining room that seemed designed to intimidate. A long mahogany table stretched nearly the entire length of the room, its polished surface gleaming under the light of an elaborate crystal chandelier. The air smelled faintly of lavender and expensive wine, and the faint murmur of conversation ceased as Maya entered. She had chosen her best dress, a simple navy gown that she had worn to weddings and celebrations back in her community. Though it was clean and carefully pressed, it paled in comparison to the tailored suits and glittering gowns worn by everyone else at the table. She could feel their eyes on her, each glance heavy with judgment. "Ah, you must be Maya," said a voice, smooth and laced with condescension. The speaker was Lucas's mother, an elegant woman with sharp features and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her diamonds caught the light as she gestured for Maya to take a seat. "I've heard so much about you." Maya forced a polite smile, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Alton." "Is it?" Mrs. Alton replied, her tone light but pointed. "Well, welcome to the family. I imagine this must be quite the adjustment for you." Maya nodded, unsure of how to respond. Lucas, seated at the head of the table, remained silent, his attention focused on the wineglass he swirled absently in his hand. He didn't seem inclined to come to her aid, leaving her to fend for herself in the lion's den. "You'll have to tell us about your profession," Lucas's sister, Vivian, chimed in, her voice dripping with mock curiosity. "I hear you make jewelry. How charming." Maya's cheeks burned, but she kept her tone steady. "Yes, I create handmade pieces. It's something I've always enjoyed." Vivian's lips curled into a smirk. "How quaint. You must be quite the artist." The table erupted into quiet laughter, the sound slicing through Maya like a blade. She stared down at her plate, her appetite vanishing. Every word, every glance, felt like a reminder that she didn't belong here. "Maya, don't take it personally, Mrs. Alton said, her voice feigning kindness. "This family simply has high standards. I'm sure Lucas sees something in you that we've yet to understand." Maya swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She wanted to speak up to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Lucas, as ever, remained silent, his expression unreadable. The rest of the meal passed in excruciating silence for Maya. The Altons continued their conversations as though she weren't there, discussing investments and exclusive events that were entirely foreign to her world. She focused on her food, though each bite felt heavy and tasteless. When dinner finally ended, Maya excused herself as politely as she could and retreated to her room. Once inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, her chest heaving as she fought back tears. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but she hadn't anticipated just how isolating it would feel to be in a house full of people yet entirely alone. The following days passed in a haze of awkward silences and unspoken tension. Maya spent most of her time confined to her room, unsure of where she belonged in the sprawling estate. Each morning she would wake to the sound of the household staff bustling about, their voices hushed as they went about their tasks. Though they were polite, their guarded expressions made it clear that they, too, saw her as an outsider. The only person who seemed unbothered by her presence was Lucas, but not in a way that brought her comfort. He treated her as though she were invisible, his words few and his attention elsewhere. He left early each morning, returning late in the evening, and even then he barely acknowledged her. Maya tried to find solace in the little things. She would sit by the massive windows in her room, watching the city below and imagining the lives of the people bustling through its streets. She missed the noise, the warmth, the familiarity of her old life. Even the constant struggle felt less isolating than this cold, hollow world. Her first glimpse of Lucas's broader social circle came a week later, at a charity gala hosted by his family. The event was held in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel, its glittering chandeliers and gilded walls the perfect backdrop for the city's elite. Lucas had insisted that Maya accompany him, though his reasons were unclear. "You'll need something appropriate to wear," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. Without waiting for her response, he handed her a credit card and added, "Have it delivered here. I'll send someone to help." The dress arrived the next day, a stunning emerald gown that fit her perfectly. Maya had never worn anything so beautiful, and yet, as she stood in front of the mirror, she felt like a child playing dress-up. The weight of the gown didn't come from the fabric or the jewels. It came from the knowledge that no matter how she looked, she would never truly belong in Lucas's world. When they arrived at the gala, Maya felt the stares before she even stepped into the room. The women in their sequined gowns and the men in their tailored tuxedos turned to look at her, their eyes scanning her from head to toe. She could hear the whispers, the faint murmurs of curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. "Is that her?" someone asked. Let's have some fun with the readers in the comments. Type winter if you've made it this far. Now, let's get back to the story. "Yes," came the whispered reply, followed by a soft chuckle. "I can't believe he actually went through with it." Lucas, as always, seemed impervious to the attention. He placed a hand lightly on Maya's back, guiding her through the crowd with practiced ease. His touch was neither comforting nor possessive. It was mechanical, like a choreographed move in a carefully planned dance. As the evening progressed, Maya found herself standing alone near one of the ornate tables laden with hors d'oeuvres. Lucas had excused himself to speak with some business associates, leaving her to navigate the glittering sea of strangers. She clutched her glass of champagne tightly, more for something to hold than to drink. "Enjoying yourself?" a woman's voice asked. Maya turned to find a tall, impeccably dressed woman standing beside her. Her smile was polite, but her eyes held a glint of amusement. "It's overwhelming," Maya admitted, trying to match the woman's tone of polite indifference. "I can imagine," the woman replied, her voice light. Maya forced a small laugh, unsure if the comment was meant to be kind or cutting. Before she could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Don't mind Elizabeth," said a man with a sly grin. "She has a knack for stating the obvious." Elizabeth rolled her eyes but didn't respond. The man extended a hand to Maya. "James Fairchild," he said, his tone warm but curious. Maya hesitated before shaking his hand. "Infamous?" James chuckled. "Well, you've certainly stirred up some conversation. Lucas doesn't usually bring guests to these events." The way he said guests made Maya's stomach tighten. She glanced across the room, where Lucas was deep in conversation with a group of sharply dressed men. He didn't seem to notice her, or perhaps he simply didn't care. "I'm not sure what there is to talk about," Maya said quietly, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. "Oh, don't be modest," Elizabeth interjected, her smile sharp. "Everyone loves a good story, and yours is quite unconventional, isn't it?" Maya felt her cheeks flush. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she hadn't chosen this life, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she offered a tight smile and excused herself, retreating to a quiet corner of the room. Later that night, as they drove back to the estate, Lucas finally broke the silence. "You handled yourself well," he said, his tone neutral. Maya turned to look at him, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "Is that what you call it? Being treated like some kind of sideshow attraction?" Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. "You'll get used to it," he said finally. Maya shook her head, her voice trembling. "I don't want to get used to it. These people, they don't see me as a person. They see me as some kind of experiment, and you just let them." Lucas's gaze flicked toward her, his expression unreadable. "What did you expect, Maya? This isn't your world." His words stung more than she cared to admit, and she turned away, staring out the window at the blur of city light. For the rest of the ride, they sat in silence, the distance between them feeling greater than ever. Life in the Alton household was as unyielding as the marble floors beneath Maya's feet. The days followed a pattern that felt like walking an endless uphill road. Maya would rise early, hoping to find some semblance of routine, only to feel the emptiness of the grand estate around her. She attempted to help the household staff, offering to wash dishes or organize small tasks, but her efforts were always met with polite refusal. "This isn't necessary, ma'am," said one of the maids, her tone kind but firm. "We're here to take care of everything." Maya nodded, trying to smile. I don't like sitting idle. I want to do something useful." The maid hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond. "Perhaps Mr. Alton would prefer if you rested instead." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a subtle reminder of her place. Maya's role in this house wasn't as a participant, but as a figure to be seen, not her. The realization stung, leaving her feeling even more out of place than before. Meals were no better. Breakfasts were silent affairs, with Lucas skimming through his phone or typing on his laptop. Though they sat across from each other at a table that could easily seat 20, the emotional distance felt insurmountable. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was usually to give instructions about upcoming social engagements or to remind her about some detail of their arrangement. "You'll need to attend another event tomorrow evening," he said one morning, his eyes never leaving the screen of his phone. Maya paused mid-bite, the fork trembling slightly in her hand. "Another one? We just went to a gala 2 days ago." "This is different," Lucas replied, his tone clipped. "It's a networking event. My business partners will be there. It's important." "Important for whom?" "I'll go," she said quietly, though the thought of enduring another night of whispers and sideways glances made her stomach churn. The event, held in yet another opulent venue, was a blur of introductions and polite exchanges. She felt like a mannequin, propped up for show while the real conversations happened around her. "She's beautiful," one man said, his voice low but not low enough to keep her from hearing. "But do you really think she can handle all this?" Lucas didn't respond, but the subtle tilt of his head toward the man told Maya everything she needed to know. He wasn't going to defend her. He never did. As the evening wore on, Maya found herself retreating to a quieter corner of the room, away from the scrutinizing eyes and relentless chatter. She watched as Lucas mingled with ease, his charm on full display as he laughed and shook hands with his colleague. He seemed untouchable, unbothered by the world around him. A stark contrast to the knot of tension that had taken residence in her chest. Later that night, back at the estate, Maya couldn't hold back her frustration any longer. She found Lucas in his study, poring over a stack of documents, and hesitated briefly before stepping inside. "Lucas," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "can we talk?" He didn't look up. "What is it?" Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I feel like I'm drowning in this life. I don't belong here, and no matter what I do, it feels like I'm just failing." Lucas finally lifted his gaze, his expression unreadable. "You knew what you were signing up for, Maya. This arrangement wasn't meant to be easy." "I didn't expect easy," she shot back, her voice rising. "But I didn't expect to feel invisible either. I'm trying, Lucas. I really am. But it's like nothing I do matters." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might actually respond. But instead, he simply leaned back in his chair, his tone as cold as ever. "You don't need to try. You just need to be here, that's all." Maya stared at him, her heart sinking. She turned on her heel and left the study, the echo of his words following her down the hall. That night, as she lay in the massive bed that still didn't feel like hers, she let the tears fall silently, the weight of her loneliness pressing down like a stone. But even amidst the struggle, there were small moments that gave Maya strength. One afternoon, as she wandered the estate's sprawling gardens, she noticed one of the gardeners struggling with a broken wheelbarrow. Without hesitation, she approached him, kneeling beside the overturned wheel to help. "You don't have to do that, ma'am," the gardener said, his voice a mix of surprise and concern. I don't mind, Maya replied with a small smile. I'm not much good with tools, but maybe I can help hold it steady. Together, they managed to fix the wheel, and for the first time in days, Maya felt a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't much, but it reminded her of who she was, a person who found joy in helping others, even in the smallest ways. These small acts of kindness didn't go unnoticed by Lucas. Though he said nothing, he couldn't help but observe the way Maya interacted with the staff, her quiet warmth a stark contrast to the cold, calculated world he had built for himself. One evening, as he passed by the kitchen, he saw her laughing softly with the chef, a tray of freshly baked cookies between. She insisted on helping, the chef explained when Lucas raised an eyebrow. Lucas didn't respond, but something about the scene stayed with him. Maya's resilience, her ability to find light in the darkest corners, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. For the first time, he found himself questioning the choices that had led him to this moment, and wondering if there was more to life than winning. Lucas had always prided himself on being a man of logic, someone who approached life with a calculated, unemotional precision. Yet, in the weeks following Maya's arrival, he found himself inexplicably drawn to her in ways he didn't fully understand. It wasn't attraction, at least not in the way he was used to. It was something deeper, something that challenged the very foundation of his worldview. It began with the small things. He would notice the way Maya interacted with the household staff, her genuine warmth disarming even the most skeptical. One evening, as he passed by the kitchen, he overheard her laughing with the chef, their voices mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread. "You didn't have to help me with this," the chef said, her tone tinged with both gratitude and surprise. "I wanted to," Maya replied, her voice soft but firm. "It's nice to feel useful." Lucas lingered just out of sight, his brow furrowing. He couldn't remember the last time he had heard laughter in this house. It was a sound that felt foreign, almost out of place amidst the cold, sterile elegance of his world. Another time, he found her in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, as she helped the gardener replant a row of wilted flowers. Her hands were caked with soil, and her hair had come loose from its braid, but she looked more at ease than he had ever seen. "Is this part of your adjustment strategy?" he asked, his voice cutting through the stillness. Maya looked up, startled. For a moment she didn't respond, her expression guarded. Then, as if deciding he wasn't worth the effort of hiding, she smiled faintly and shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe I just like the garden more than the house." Lucas raised an eyebrow. Most people would prefer the comfort of the house to kneeling in the dirt. "I'm not most people," she replied simply, turning her attention back to the flowers. Her words lingered with him longer than he cared to admit. Despite her resilience, the cracks in Maya's composure began to show as the pressures of Lucas's world mounted. Social engagements became a constant in her life, each one more draining than the last. She learned to plaster on a polite smile, to nod and make small talk even as the whispers and sideways glances chipped away at her confidence. At one particularly lavish dinner party, Maya found herself seated next to a woman whose sharp tongue rivaled even the finest knives in the Alton estate. "So," the woman began, swirling her wine lazily. Maya stiffened, her smile faltering. "I make jewelry," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. "How charming," the woman replied, her tone dripping with insincerity. And here, I thought Lucas only associated with people who had real careers. The words stung, but Maya refused to let her discomfort show. She glanced at Lucas, who was seated at the other end of the table, deep in conversation with a group of men. He didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Maya's silence only seemed to embolden the woman. "I must say, it's refreshing to see someone like you in a setting like this. It adds a certain authenticity to the room." Before Maya could respond, another guest chimed in. "Indeed. It's like having a piece of street art in a gallery, unexpected, but oddly charming." The table erupted into polite laughter, the sound cutting through Maya like a blade. She stared down at her plate, her appetite gone. For the rest of the evening, she said little, her mind racing as she fought to keep her composure. That night, after they returned to the estate, Maya couldn't contain her frustration any longer. She cornered Lucas in the foyer, her hands trembling as she struggled to find the right words. "Why do you let them talk to me like that?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. Lucas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Maya, this is how these people are. It's not worth getting upset over." "Not worth it?" she repeated, her voice rising. "They treated me like I'm some kind of charity case, and you just sat there and let them." "What did you expect me to do?" Lucas shot back, his tone defensive. "Harmless? Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to sit there while people tear you apart, knowing that the one person who's supposed to have your back won't even look up from his glass of wine?" For a moment, Lucas said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then his jaw tightened and he turned away. "This was never meant to be easy, Maya. You knew that." Maya stared at him, her chest heaving as she tried to rein in her emotions. "You don't get it," she said quietly. "You don't understand what it's like to be surrounded by people who think they're better than you, to fight every day just to prove that you're worth something." Lucas didn't respond. He stood there, his back to her, the silence between them stretching like a cat. In the days that followed, Maya withdrew even further, spending most of her time in the garden or the kitchen, where she felt more at ease. The staff began to warm to her, their initial wariness giving way to genuine affection. They admired her kindness, her willingness to help, and her ability to find joy in the simplest of things. Lucas watched from the sidelines, his thoughts increasingly consumed by the woman who had upended his carefully ordered life. He saw the way she carried herself, her quiet strength, a stark contrast to the loud, overbearing personalities of the socialites he had grown up around. She didn't demand attention or validation. She simply existed, unapologetically herself. One evening, as he stood in the doorway of the kitchen, he watched as Maya laughed with the chef, her smile brighter than he had ever seen. She had flour on her hands and a streak of it on her cheek, but she didn't seem to care. For the first time in years, Lucas felt something stir within him, something that made him question the life he had built and the person he had become. Maya awoke to the muffled sounds of voices coming from the study down the hall. It was past midnight, and the estate was usually silent at this hour. Curious and slightly concerned, she slipped out of bed and tiptoed toward the sound, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. The voices grew clearer as she approached. One of them was Lucas's, calm, measured, and unmistakable. The other was unfamiliar, deep and gravelly, filled with the casual confidence of someone who spoke without fear of being overheard. "You actually pulled it off," the unfamiliar voice said, a trace of amusement in his tone. "I didn't think you'd go through with it." Lucas's response was quieter, but Maya could still make out the words. It wasn't exactly difficult. She needed the money. People like her always do. Maya froze, her breath catching in her throat. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering in her chest. "Well," the other man continued, chuckling softly, "I suppose you've proven your point. You can turn anyone into the perfect accessory, even a street vendor." Maya's stomach churned as the words sank in. She felt a cold wave of nausea wash over her, her mind racing as she tried to piece together what she had just heard. The truth hit her like a blow to the chest. She was nothing more than a bet to him, a game to prove a point. Her hand trembled as she pushed the door open slightly, just enough to see Lucas standing by the fireplace, his back to her. He was holding a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it lazily. The man sitting across from him looked every bit as polished as Lucas, his sharp suit and smug grin a mirror image of the circles Lucas moved in. "I don't know how you tolerate it, though," the man continued, shaking his head. "Pretending to care, sitting through those insufferable dinners. I'd lose my mind." Lucas shrugged. "It's temporary. Besides, it's not as bad as you think. She's resilient." The faint note of hesitation in his voice might have meant something to Maya in another context, but now it only felt like an insult. Resilient. As though she was some kind of experiment, a project for him to dissect and study. Unable to listen any longer, Maya stepped back, her vision blurring as tears welled in her eyes. She turned and ran back to her room, her breath hitching as she tried to hold back the sobs threatening to escape. Once inside, she locked the door and collapsed onto the bed. The next morning, Lucas noticed something was off. Maya was quieter than usual, her movements stiff and mechanical as she picked at her breakfast. She didn't meet his eyes, and when he spoke to her, her responses were clipped and distant. "Is something wrong?" he asked finally, setting his coffee cup down and studying her closely. Maya looked up at him, her eyes cold and unreadable. "Do you really care?" Lucas frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stood abruptly, the legs of her chair scraping against the floor as she pushed it back. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. Lucas stood as well, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. "Maya, what are you talking about?" She turned to face him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I heard you," she spat, her voice breaking. "Last night, I heard every—" Lucas's eyes widened slightly, but he quickly recovered, his face settling into a mask of calm. "Maya, whatever you think you heard—" "Don't," she interrupted, her voice rising. "Don't insult me by pretending it wasn't real. I heard you talking about me like I'm some kind of game, a bet." Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but she didn't give him the chance. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" she continued, her voice shaking with emotion. "I gave up everything, my pride, my dignity, to be here to save my mother, and all this time you've been laughing at me behind my back." "It wasn't like that," Lucas said quietly, his voice tinged with something that almost sounded like regret. "It was stupid, Maya, a stupid bet, but it's not how I see you now." Maya let out a bitter laugh, tears streaming down her face. "How you see me now? Do you even hear yourself? You think that makes this better?" Lucas took a step toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Don't," she said firmly. "Don't come near me. I can't do this anymore." "Maya." "No," she snapped, her voice breaking. "You don't get to apologize and make this go away. I'm done, Lucas. I'm leaving." Lucas stood frozen as she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. For the first time in years, he felt completely powerless. He wanted to stop her, to explain, to somehow undo the damage he had caused, but the words wouldn't come. Maya didn't stop until she reached her room. She grabbed the small suitcase she had brought with her and began packing, her hands shaking as she shoved her belongings inside. She didn't have a plan, but she didn't care. As she zipped up the suitcase, a knock came at the door. She ignored it, her breath hitching as she struggled to keep herself together. "Maya," Lucas's voice came from the other side. "Please, let me explain." She didn't respond. She couldn't. If she opened that door, if she let him speak, she knew she might falter. And she couldn't afford to falter, not now. After a long moment, the sound of his footsteps faded, and Maya exhaled shakily. She wiped her tears, squared her shoulders, and opened the door. The hallway was empty, the silence almost oppressive as she made her way toward the front entrance. As she stepped outside, the morning sun warmed her face, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of relief. The weight on her chest began to lift, replaced by a quiet resolve. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she would face it on her own terms. And for the first time in a long time, she felt free. Lucas sat alone in the sprawling living room of his estate, the silence pressing down on him like a physical weight. The house, once a testament to his success and power, now felt hollow and lifeless. His glass of whiskey sat untouched on the coffee table, the amber liquid catching the faint glow of the fireplace. For the first time in years, he felt the sharp sting of regret, not just for what he had done, but for who he had become. Maya's words replayed in his mind, each one cutting deeper than the last. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I gave up everything to be here, and all this time, you've been laughing at me." He had always considered himself untouchable, immune to the judgments and emotions of others. But Maya had shattered that illusion, her anger, her pain. It had exposed the cracks in his carefully constructed facade, forcing him to confront the emptiness of his life. The next morning, Lucas stood at the window of his study, staring out at the garden where Maya had often spent her time. He could almost see her there, kneeling in the dirt with her hair falling loose around her face, a faint smile on her lips as she tended to the flowers. The memory brought an ache to his chest that he didn't fully understand. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his life, to bend the world to his will, but Maya had been different. She had defied his expectations at every turn, refusing to fit neatly into the mold he had tried to impose on her. And now, she was gone, leaving a void that he couldn't ignore. "Sir," Peter, his driver, said from the doorway, interrupting his thoughts. "The board meeting is in an hour. Shall I prepare the car?" Lucas turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Cancel it." Peter hesitated. "Cancel the board meeting?" "Yes," Lucas said firmly, "and reschedule the rest of my appointments for the week. I have something more important to take care of." Peter nodded, though his confusion was evident. "Very well, sir." Over the next few days, Lucas began to make changes. Small at first, but significant. He started with his employees, personally reaching out to those he had previously overlooked. He walked the floors of his company's headquarters, speaking to receptionists, janitors, and junior staff members, with a sincerity that surprised even himself. "Thank you for your hard work," he told one of the night shift security guards, a man who had been with the company for over a decade but had never spoken directly to Lucas before. The man's astonished expression was a stark reminder of how disconnected Lucas had been from the people who kept his empire running. At home, he dismantled the rigid structure of the household staff, encouraging them to take breaks and treating them with a kindness they had never experienced under his roof. He even spent time in the kitchen, attempting to cook his own meals, a task that ended in burnt toast and a ruined omelette, but also a newfound respect for the people who had always done it for him. Lucas's transformation wasn't limited to his personal life. He began to reevaluate his approach to business, shifting his focus from profit to purpose. He initiated programs to support underprivileged communities, funding scholarships, and donating to local charities. His board members were initially resistant, questioning the financial implications of his decisions, but Lucas stood firm. "This isn't about the bottom line," he told them during a heated meeting. "It's about doing what's right. If we can use our success to make a difference, then we have an obligation to do so." His words carried a conviction that silenced even the most skeptical among them. Despite the progress he was making, Lucas couldn't shake the thought of Maya. He wondered where she was, what she was doing, and whether she had found the peace she deserved. He wanted to reach out to her, to apologize, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Words were cheap, and he had already failed her once. If he wanted to win back her trust, he would have to prove that he had changed, not just for her, but for himself. One evening, as he sat in the study, flipping through old photo albums that his mother had left behind, he found himself pausing on a particular picture. It was of his parents, standing outside a small community center they had built in the early days of their marriage. His mother's smile was radiant, and his father looked happier than Lucas could ever remember him being. It struck him then that his parents had understood something he had always overlooked: the importance of connection, of using privilege to uplift others. They had built their wealth on the foundation of giving back, and somewhere along the way, Lucas had lost sight of that. He closed the album and leaned back in his chair, his mind made up. If he wanted to honor Maya and the lessons she had unknowingly taught him, he needed to do more. He needed to find her, to show her that he was no longer the man who had treated her as a bet. Lucas's search for Maya was not as straightforward as he had imagined. She had left no forwarding address, no clue as to where she might have gone. The only lead he had was her mother's small apartment, where she had been living before their arrangement began. But when Lucas arrived, he found the place empty, the windows dark, and the door locked. He knocked anyway, the sound echoing through the quiet hallway of the aging building. A neighbor peeked out from behind a cracked door, her curious eyes narrowing when she saw him. "Excuse me," Lucas said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'm looking for Maya Singh. She used to live here." The woman regarded him suspiciously before shaking her head. "She left weeks ago, took her mother with her, haven't seen her since." "Do you know where she went?" Lucas pressed, his frustration mounting. The woman shrugged. "No idea, but if you find her, tell her we miss her around here. She always took care of everyone." Lucas nodded, his chest tightening at the woman's words. Even in her struggles, Maya had been a beacon of kindness, a quality he had only begun to understand. He thanked the woman and left, his mind racing as he considered his next steps. It took days of searching, calling contacts, and following leads before Lucas finally found her. She was working at a small community center on the outskirts of the city, a modest building surrounded by a bustling neighborhood. As he approached, he saw her through one of the large windows, sitting at a table with a group of children. She was helping them with their homework, her expression patient and warm as she guided them through their lesson. Lucas hesitated, his heart pounding in a way that felt foreign and uncomfortable. For a man who had spent his life exuding confidence, the thought of facing Maya now filled him with an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability. He knew he couldn't undo the pain he had caused, but he hoped, desperately, that he could at least begin to make amends. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type balloon if you've made it this far. Only those who made it will understand. Now, let's continue with the story. He stepped inside, the sound of the door creaking open drawing Maya's attention. Her eyes widened when she saw him, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. The children, sensing the tension, began to whisper among themselves, their curiosity palpable. "Maya," Lucas said finally, his voice soft but steady, "can we talk?" Maya stood slowly, her expression guarded. "Kids, why don't you take a break?" she said, her tone calm but firm. The children scattered, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet room. Lucas took a deep breath, his hands clenched at his sides. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now," he began, "but I needed to find you. I needed to tell you how sorry I am." Maya crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "Sorry for what, Lucas? For treating me like a project? For using me to prove a point? Or for thinking you could buy your way out of everything?" "All of it," Lucas admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I was wrong, Maya, about everything, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I see it now. I see how much I hurt you, and I can't live with myself without at least trying to make it right." Maya said nothing, her expression unreadable. Lucas pressed on, his voice trembling with emotion. "You were right, about everything you said. I've spent my whole life chasing success, trying to prove that I'm the best, and somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really matters. But you showed me what kindness looks like, what strength looks like, and I know I don't deserve it, but I want the chance to be better." Maya took a step back, her arms dropping to her sides. "You don't get to show up here and expect me to just forget everything that happened," she said, her voice shaking. "Do you have any idea how hard it's been to rebuild my life after what you did?" "I know," Lucas said quietly, "and I don't expect you to forget. I don't even expect you to forgive me. I just want to show you that I've changed. Not for you, for me, because of you." Maya looked away, her jaw tightening. "Words are easy, Lucas. They don't mean anything without actions." "I know," he said again. "That's why I came here, to show you. I've started making changes, at work, at home. I've donated to charities, set up programs to help people like you, like us. But none of it matters if I can't fix what I broke with you." Maya turned back to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Why now? Why do you care so much now?" "Because I finally see you, Maya," Lucas said, his voice raw. "Not as someone to fix or prove something with, but as someone I respect, someone I admire. You deserved better from me, and I want to give you that, even if it's just by letting you know how much you've changed me." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavily between them. Maya studied him, her expression softening slightly as she saw the sincerity in his eyes. She didn't know if she could trust him again, but for the first time, she believed that he was truly trying. "I need time, Lucas," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Time to figure out what I want, what I need. I can't just jump back into this." Lucas nodded, his shoulders sagging with relief. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait as long as it takes." Maya turned away, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the table. "You can go now," she said, her voice steadier. "I have work to do." Lucas hesitated but finally nodded. "Thank you," he said softly, turning to leave. As he stepped outside into the fading sunlight, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. He didn't know what the future held, but he was willing to fight for it, one step at a time. Weeks passed, and Lucas heard nothing from Maya. He continued his efforts to change, pouring himself into the charitable programs he had started and focusing on building a life that wasn't defined solely by wealth and power. Yet, despite his progress, the absence of Maya in his life lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder of the emptiness he had created for himself. One afternoon, as he sat in his office reviewing proposals for a new community center, his assistant knocked on the door. "Sir," she said, her voice hesitant, "there's someone here to see you." Lucas looked up, his heart skipping a beat. "Who is it?" The assistant smiled faintly. "She didn't give her name, but I think you'll want to see her." He stood quickly, his chair scraping against the floor as he rushed to the reception. And there she was, Maya, standing by the window, her hands clasped in front of her as she looked out at the city below. She turned as he approached, her expression calm but unreadable. "Maya," he said softly, his voice betraying the whirlwind of emotions he felt. "Ah." She raised a hand, stopping him. "I'm not here to dwell on the past, Lucas," she said firmly. "I'm here because I've been thinking about you, about me, about everything." Lucas nodded, his throat tightening as he waited for her to continue. "You've changed," she said finally, her eyes searching his face. "I can see it, and I believe it's real, but that doesn't mean we can just go back to the way things were." "I don't want to go back," Lucas said quickly. "I want to move forward, with you, if you'll let me. I know I've hurt you, and I know I have a lot to make up for, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Maya studied him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. "I don't need you to make up for anything, Lucas. What I need is to know that you're doing this for the right reasons, not for me, but for yourself." "I am," he assured her. "Because of you, I've realized what really matters. I don't want to be the man I was before, Maya. I want to be better." They began to meet regularly, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. Maya was cautious, but she couldn't deny the sincerity in Lucas's action. He wasn't the same man who had approached her with that reckless bet months ago. This Lucas was thoughtful, humble, and genuinely committed to making a difference. One day, as they sat in the community center where Maya worked, she finally opened up about her life before they met. "You think you know everything about me," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "But there's a lot you don't know." Lucas leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Tell me." She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Before my mother got sick, I had a good job. A corporate job, actually. I worked in finance, managing accounts for small businesses. I was good at it too. But when my mother's health started to decline, I couldn't keep up with the demands of the job. So I left, thinking I could find something more flexible. But life didn't work out that way." Lucas listened intently, his admiration for her growing with every word. "You gave up everything for her," he said softly. "That takes more strength than most people have." Maya shrugged, her smile bittersweet. "She's my mother. I would do it all over again if I had to." Lucas reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "You've spent so much of your life taking care of others, Maya. Maybe it's time someone took care of you." As their bond deepened, they began to collaborate on projects to help underprivileged communities. Maya's knowledge of finance and her ability to connect with people proved invaluable. And together, they launched initiatives that provided resources, education, and opportunities to those in need. Their efforts culminated in the opening of a new community center, a project that Lucas had funded but insisted on naming after Maya. "You're the heart of this," he told her during the ribbon-cutting ceremony. "None of this would have been possible without you." Maya looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "We did this together," she said, "and it's just the beginning." Months later, as they stood on the balcony of Lucas's estate, watching the sun set over the city, Maya turned to him with a smile. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we got married?" Lucas chuckled, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "Honestly, I try not to. I wasn't exactly my best self back then. You said, 'This will change your life.'" Maya's smile widened. "And you were right, it did. Just not in the way either of us expected." Lucas took her hand, his expression serious. "Maya, I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I want to spend the rest of my life earning it. I want to be the kind of man who makes you proud." "You already are," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. "And I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, they stood together, ready to face whatever the future held. Their journey had been anything but conventional, but it had brought them to a place of understanding, respect, and love. And for the first time in their lives, they both felt truly at peace. Do you think Maya made the right choice in giving Lucas a second chance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss any of our heartwarming and dramatic tales. If you're craving more incredible stories, click here on the end screen to keep watching.